Hello, everybody. This is
Yay.
LiberAsian. I'm the host of the LiberAsian Podcast, where we explore how Asians can live lives of greater freedom despite any limiting cultural beliefs, stereotypes, and life situations that might be in the way. My passion is to help other Asians do what they love, even if it's not seen as a stable or high paying career. And I'm a life coach as well. So that's a bit about me. And on the show with us today, we have Anthony. Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Anthony Lay, spells L-E, but pronounced Lay, as in uh, legitimately your best friend, as in legacy builder, as in
Hmm.
lead. Okay, that part doesn't work very well, but I'm also a leadership coach.
Oh, nice, nice.
Uh, there's like so much.
Hmm. Yeah,
I actually picked
yeah.
it up from an intern years ago who taught me that, and I thought like I love this. So whenever I do that intro, I always like shout out to that intern,
Oh, got it. Yeah.
um, or former intern.
Hmm.
What else did I say? Okay. I am massively immersed in the leadership world, like leadership development.
Hmm.
I am the deputy director of the Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. I'm a board member of the Vietnamese-American Roundtable.
Ooh.
I also have a leadership coaching business that focuses on leadership development for the Asian American community and people of color.
Mm.
And so, thank you for having me on your podcast because this is just
Yeah.
exciting things to be able to share and talk about.
Wow. Wow, you're up to a lot, and I am just starting to get into this space. I've been in it for about a year, but wow, like I'm sure there's a lot we can learn from your experiences on the different boards and your experience with leadership as well. So yeah, one question I love to start off with is what does freedom mean to you, and what does it look like to you?
Mm. So I think this is the reason why I'm so excited to be on this podcast because I've been thinking about this idea of freedom a lot.
Right.
Um, and it's so for me, freedom means is having the ability, the capacity to navigate authentically from where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important because um, there's so much injustices, so many barriers to preventing us to living like full lives, that it's sometimes it gets really daunting and overwhelming to recognize like, hey, maybe sometimes these goals we're not able to reach it, and with more anxiety, depression, fear that feeds into our daily lives, then we just feel like we can't move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were to take a step back, go back into our own strength, whether it's going back and tapping into like our community, our family, the
Mm-hmm.
culture, our
Mm-hmm.
upbringing, the different challenges and how we overcome those challenges, and then also stepping into a place of, what is that we really want for ourselves that's meaningful, that's authentic to our true desire, to what we really want to have in the world and what we want to
Mm-hmm.
create.
Mm-hmm.
If we take a step forward, that's authentic to who we are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's freedom right there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that, just like the full juicy breadth of that definition you've come up with. Um and yeah, when you talk about drawing strength from our culture, our community, and our upbringing, what are some ways you feel we can really make the most of those strengths to rise above the obstacles in our lives?
Yeah. So there's a couple. There's like I want to use like a little bit of Asian American history, and then also my personal family history, and
Mhm.
then my history. So like three
Right.
points really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's always this talk about like there's too much talk about racism. There's too much talk about like, oh, this is so burdening me, right? And I'm like, well, if we disregard our history, then we don't know a lot of our strength and where is our power coming from.
Mm.
So there is in this Asian American history, there's a lot of time where we just don't acknowledge the Asian American history part. So, for example, like there's been multiple Chinatowns that's been burned down in San Jose.
Mm.
We don't recognize the first arrivals of all these Asian American groups. And when we were at war or a crisis hit the United States, we either remove them from their land, aka the Japanese internment, Executive Order 9066, or we blame it all on Asians and we attack
Mm.
them. We also, right, we have continued to be successful, and that's working with other communities, right, working with the Black community, the brown communities, and we've actually been successful. So there's a little of that, like what I mean by like recognize that Asian American history. um
Mm-hmm.
Part of my strength in this case of the culture and the history is also like my parents were are Vietnamese refugees.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember time I had this really heart to heart talk with my dad, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I grew up like Vietnamese American Asian, and I feel like as an Asian American male, you're taught not to show emotions. You're not taught
Mm.
to pretend you have to do less than that. You're not man enough.
Mm.
But I was like really scared. I was like transitioning in different parts of my life, and I asked my dad, like, "Hey, were you ever scared?" And
Mm-hmm.
he was like, "Yeah, of course I was scared." I was like, "Oh, when?" When we had to flee Vietnam, and I'm like, "Oh, what'd you do?" We pray, because that's all you can do sometimes when because they've escaped on a boat, they're on the ocean.
Yeah.
um, and my dad was just like all we could do was pray, right? All
Mm-hmm.
we could do is just have faith in our journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's powerful in itself, because I also realize that's my family's culture, right? That when
Mm-hmm.
time gets tough, we take actions, we're on the journey,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have a faith in something bigger that's beyond us, something more
Mm-hmm.
impactful, meaningful.
Mm.
And then the personal history part, right? We all have that, where if we can just go back and just be really conscious of like some of this, how far we've come, we start
Mm-hmm.
seeing some of those things in our strengths, that
Mm-hmm.
shows up too, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are probably days we've all experienced where we're like, how am I going to get through this day? Because you just don't believe in yourself. But the one step forward, one by step, one step,
Mm-hmm.
next, and so on, you realize is like you've gone a lot farther than you ever imagined. And so that's what I mean, like recognizing our history, what we come
Yeah.
as Asian Americans, recognize my family history, our family history, and then also our own personal history.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, that was a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's those are certainly, yeah, like a lot of strengths we can draw from our history, what our ancestors looked forward to, their faith in something bigger, having faith in something bigger. And um yeah, like even starting to be more vulnerable, being more vulnerable and authentic with our emotions. I'm curious, what it takes for people to overcome those barriers. Like, for instance, for you, what has driven you to become more open with how you feel despite the cultural barriers for that?
Hmm. So the cultural barriers, I think one of the first story that comes to my mind is like, um, actually, I would say courage and vulnerability. Those
Mm-hmm.
two go hand in hand, but they're showing up a lot in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's why I just don't subscribe to this idea of what it means to be like a strong man anymore. Like this really one dimension facade. Because when I was subscribing to that idea,
Mm-hmm.
I was like taking on a path that was for everyone else. Like I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to being Asian American, I was trying to be a doctor, right? Trying to be like make my parents happy, trying to be this
Yeah.
good Asian son.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the day when I started becoming more courageous and understanding my emotions, I realized I hated that path. It just felt miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And so the vulnerability comes into recognizing that, there will be a sense of loss. There may be a sense of um, where people may not like you.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's probably better to not worry too much about people not liking you, and recognizing that if you're miserable, people will definitely won't like you after that. But if you're happy and you're pursuing the path that you're enjoying,
Mm-hmm.
people are going to gravitate to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because good energy, I believe, also attracts good energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not trying to say like be optimistic 100%, right? I'm just saying that good intention, having faith, and focusing on bringing good things to light in the world,
Mm-hmm.
it attracts a different type of person. And
Mm-hmm.
that actually brought me to better and better communities. And like, I know I gave my introduction early on, and it's not like, oh man, I think it's really cool or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would have gone there if I didn't take the chance to believe in
Mm-hmm.
myself and then give myself the chance to be vulnerable to allow community to come support me too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and the more I step into the idea of courage and vulnerability, the more that I find people, great people, showing up and supporting me through my journey.
Mm.
Yeah. I think I
Wow.
answered the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, you did. You did. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's like when you cast aside that, the things that aren't quite you anymore, and and just become, I guess, like looking to see how you can be a contribution. What do you love to do? That attracts a different level of energy, and yeah, a different level of people, or maybe a different energy even from the same people. Um, it's kind of interesting, but like when I started doing what I loved, like I had different kinds of conversations with family as well. So it's like, you know, yeah, yeah, I can see the good that can come from that, and yeah. When it comes to faith and having faith, um, what helps people maintain that day in and day out? What makes
Ooh,
faith really strong?
okay. That's always tough only because so I grew up Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Pretty much I was born and raised baptized as Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was lucky enough, or maybe it wasn't, maybe it was actually faith that led me to this, right? I started exploring a discipline
Mm-hmm.
called Ignatian Spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed my world. Um, and it's actually funny because I actually use this for my coaching now, like this process, this
Mm-hmm.
Ignatian Spirituality. And when people ask me, it's like, oh, what's it that like? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like, well, how Buddhism has certain practices and disciplines and like practices and procedures. Ignatian spirituality has that too, and I find a lot of like similarities like between these practices, like disciplines. And so this is what I use for coaching, and this is what I use when I mentor people, and this is actually what I use to do like strategic conversation piece around like our strategic planning with the organization I work with and with people I consult or coach. And we always start off with this idea of like recognizing, okay, where are we at right now in terms of our successes? What have we been able to do?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why is that you want to recognize that there are successes. We all have our strengths, and we're coming in here, right? We're not
Mm-hmm.
helpless. We're not powerless.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing that is recognizing, you do kind of like a scan, like just what are the good things that you've done really well, and then areas of improvements, things that you can
Mm-hmm.
improve upon. And then the last one is what areas of grace do you need? And I think that's key because
Mm-hmm.
it's also recognizing what are things that are not in control, and you just have to acknowledge that part.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen people who are type A like
Yeah.
personalities,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where they fail. They think that they can
Mm-hmm.
control everything. It's like you have to recognize you can't control everything.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so and then right, the last part of the action now comes from this reflection. I've seen various versions of this, right? It shows up to what went well, what could be improved, what are next steps,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly, I use that in my spiritual practices.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
where this is where it scares a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Giving myself time to sit down, be quiet for about between 15 to 20 minutes or even 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
where I just breathe and just
Mm-hmm.
allow my thoughts to flow in. If you can get past that and acknowledge that these thoughts are passing by, then you can start going through these thoughts of what's good, what could be improved upon,
Mm-hmm.
and then like where you can move forward. And I think that's where faith can be really strengthened,
Mm-hmm.
because we're building ourselves up. And as we
Mm-hmm.
build ourselves up, we have the journey, the strength to take, we have the strength to go on that journey of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're continuously not practicing this, in this
Mm-hmm.
case, even just like reminding ourselves that we are worthy of some, of like, have any type of worth, or we're valuable, if we're not acknowledging that with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
then our faith journey is going to be incredibly hard, because every part of it, we're always going to be asking ourselves the question, am I worthy enough? Am I good enough?
Mm-hmm.
Which is surprising, because those are the same question that affects people who struggle with imposter syndrome.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe is that, yeah, you think like imposter syndrome may be more widespread than we commonly think?
It's incredibly widespread. Like, I hear a lot of Asian folks talk about it. Then I hear the brown community, Latinx community talk about it. Then I hear the black community talk about it.
Yeah.
Then I hear the white community talking about it.
Yeah.
And I go, that's kind of interesting. Then sudden, I realize something, right? It's the society we live in. It
Mm-hmm.
it pushes too much worth on getting things done,
Mm-hmm.
right? So much on status, too much on power, too much
Yeah.
on like money, achievements, that one then we become trapped.
Mm-hmm.
And once we become trapped in the cycle of what our self-worth is attached to, then
Mm-hmm.
we can't navigate freely anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Right.
the imposter syndrome part of it, I think, is like recognizing where they're worth at,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can grow from that place,
Mm-hmm.
and recognize where are we being tricked into believing our worth is being associated with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that ties right back into like navigating the world while staying true to ourselves, right? It's like at all these different twists and turns, right? Sorting out what you know like the rest of everybody seems to desire, and from what you desire, truly desire, it can be you know quite a bit sometimes, like and I guess yeah, like what on your journey, what have you learned about, how to distinguish between what's true to you and what's not true to you?
Ooh, that's a fun one. So, um, well, I guess I'm going to share this. So, I was in a coaching session, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was a client for this one, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a shout out to my coach. Her name is Rita, Foot Community, founded Community Roots. Um, and originally, my goal was that I wanted a house. I wanted to have enough money to buy a house,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I process. I want. Also, I'm single, so that's probably, this is where it's coming from, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm single. I want to buy a house so that when I am dating and I'm ready to get married, that we have a house ready to go, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll be ready, and it'll just be set up.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the coaching session, and Rita does a really great job. And I do this for my clients as well too, right? As I become more aware how important this practice
Mm-hmm.
is giving them space and say, where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
I realized that idea of having a house and then being married was never my intention and goal. It was something
Yeah.
that was put in by society, saying that this is, if you want a worthwhile life, this is what you need.
Uh-huh.
But
Mm-hmm.
every part of it was just not based in reality, right? There is like rising like home prices in the Bay Area. We
Mm-hmm.
have people who are now like fighting all these injustices in the
Mm-hmm.
world, and my heart in that and helping people find freedom. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't even have a partner, right? So how am I building a future with a partner that doesn't exist?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so a lot of that mindfulness and stepping back and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that this does make sense, I go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that is actually not my goal. Because right
Mm-hmm.
now, my goal and my dreams is really to take my leadership practice to
Mm-hmm.
help Asian Americans first, right? And then other people of color,
Mm-hmm.
um, to really navigate and build a stronger voice for themselves. So that way, when they show up, they know how to navigate authentically. They don't have to
Yeah.
worry about, oh, am I doing the right thing? Is this,
Mm-hmm.
do I need to stay quiet? I want to rock the boat
Mm-hmm.
versus, you know what, that was completely wrong. Or I don't agree with you. And be able to
Mm-hmm.
say that without hesitating.
Mm-hmm.
I have people who I talk to who are clients, and
Mm-hmm.
their reaction is when someone says something, I have to assess, are they right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know it's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need to assess? Well, there might be
Mm-hmm.
one thing that might be right about, but the other
Mm-hmm.
things are wrong. Because they're right about that one thing,
Mm-hmm.
I have no case against that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so those are the trap that a lot of people fall
Mm.
into. And I'm helping
Yeah.
people to say, you cannot do that to me because that is not just and right.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And so
sometimes
going back
where,
to that,
yeah, like that's sometimes where the tricky part comes in. And for many years, right, like I completely bought into things my mom said about the way the world works. And because it sounded very logical and well put together, and she has more years of experience and whatnot, except a lot of it is built around a scarcity mindset. And just
right,
in her particular values that aren't the same as my values. So it's like, yeah, for a long time, maybe I genuinely did believe in working at my 9 to 5 for a short period of time, right? And then realize something's not right. Something's off. And, I don't think this is
right.
like my soul's purpose or my calling. And questioning that, right? So yeah, like just yeah, and also being the ever evolving people we are, like changing needs over time. And I spoke with someone on this podcast who switched so many jobs in her life because she needed more money or it wasn't exciting for her anymore. And yeah, just like the courage to leave things and be decisive about it. And yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy how much trust we in our life, like our leaders, our parents.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not saying that everything they said it's not wrong. I'm
Mhm.
not saying it's wrong in any way. What I'm
Mhm.
saying is it's good to take a step back and like what you're saying, right? It's like, is this the right path for me? And be able to
Yeah.
off to play in that to play around that question, right? Not play into it, but play around with it, right? Experiment. Be
Mhm.
a child, like explore.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
that has continuously changed my life in such a better way.
Yeah. Yeah, like yeah, those times of pause and like deep meditation and sorting through our thoughts and getting very like going back to the simplicity of what it is we truly want. Yeah, it's such important work. And you know um can save a lot of time in our lives too. It took a lot of time and money too. But yeah, I was also
Yeah.
wondering, you know, I guess like what what can catapult us as Asians to greater leadership, because maybe because of our upbringing we're kind of taught to you know um, be the yes man or just do what we're told, right? And also we have this like we have this unconditional view of higher up says, oh, everything they say is right, but yeah, like what I guess what helps people really break that mold. It muster up the courage to do that, because maybe someone knows that the right thing to do for a lot of years already, but they still feel held back. And yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Mm. I think I don't know if this would be universal, but working with my clients and then also doing my internal work,
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to hold paradoxes.
Mm.
Um, like if you are able to hold like what seems like contradicting ideas in your head
Mm-hmm.
and ask the question how they can coexist,
Mm.
that allows us a lot more freedom
Mm.
instantaneously. A good example is if I choose a career that my parents don't agree upon,
Mm-hmm.
it means that I don't love them,
Mm.
right? You take a step
Mm-hmm.
back and it's like, can I love my parents still and still
Mm-hmm.
do a career path that is
Mm-hmm.
true to what I desire in life?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, right? You can still love your parents and you
Mm-hmm.
can still choose a career path.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that we would have to evolve the way we interact with each other. It will
Mm-hmm.
probably be a lot of heartaches and heartbreaks because our parents
Mm-hmm.
probably won't understand that because they
Mm-hmm.
themselves probably struggle with holding the idea of like will struggle with holding like contradicting ideas, but they may actually can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of my dear
Right.
friends, she brought this idea up, and I was like, instead of always saying this, but this and this,
Mm-hmm.
what if we start saying this and this and this and this?
Mm-hmm.
And so I now catch myself right when I say, but have you thought? Wait, hold on a second. Let me try replace that sentence again with the word and
Uh-huh.
opportunity shows up, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my goodness, we could really make things coexist with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what happens in equity
Mm-hmm.
work? We're always talking about black and whites,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
how about what if we talked about whites and blacks and Asians and Latinx community, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if equity work isn't about butts and scarcity, but what can we do to be inclusive and meet
Mm-hmm.
ourselves where we're at?
Right.
What if our life and our career and our
Mm-hmm.
family life and like desire that we have for affection
Mm-hmm.
could all exist with just the word and
Mm.
that has changed my perception
Wow.
so much.
Wow. I love that. Wow. Oh, I think that
Yeah,
it's
I
probably the
have a lot of
first time
wise
I've heard
friends.
of the power, like just the amount of power this idea can have. Maybe the second time I've heard of the concept, but yeah, wow. Yeah, that can change a
Yeah,
lot of things, and also help people find acceptance around situations where, let's say, there's a lot of financial constraints, or maybe they realize, oh, maybe I do need to work this job a few more months or years before I can move on to the next step, and then sort of like living with that. It's like, yeah, I want to be here, and right now I don't have that yet, and like coming to a state of acceptance around it all, and yeah, that peaceful coexistence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there is a danger to that. I just realized one danger to it though.
Okay.
We gotta be careful that we don't try to overachieve ourselves in this situation where we start putting ands and ands and ands and we overload
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
like we do have to go back.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rein it in
Um,
a little bit
which is funny because
afterwards.
yeah, that's critical because we don't have there is a big button in this one. It's just the time constraint and our energy and our emotional strengths or emotional our emotional energy and our time, right? Those
Yeah.
two are
Yeah.
probably going to be the deciding factors.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, that's what freedom is also about: emotional richness and contentment.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like in a world of more, right? That can be challenging, right? It can be challenging to like rein it back in and feel content with what is. So, yeah, keeping a balance between desire and contentment on some level.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I also want to get your thoughts on gender roles. What are your thoughts on gender roles in the Asian world?
Okay, I can speak only to okay. I and it's funny because like sometimes we have to like switch roles between like okay, I am going out into the bigger, larger world. I am going to represent the Asian American community a little bit. But in this case, I will just only talk about my experience as a Vietnamese American male.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and so I feel like Vietnamese American, actually Vietnamese male, right, in particular, needs to have a sense of like masculinity. They need to continuously flaunt that somehow, whether it's always talking over somebody,
Mm.
yelling,
Mm-hmm.
or sticking to a way, be stubborn about a certain way that they approach things in life.
Mm-hmm.
And a sign of weakness for our Asian, or in this case, Vietnamese American males or Vietnamese male,
Mm-hmm.
is I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to stick by my guns.
Mm.
Um, and I think there is that part where I don't grieve. That's really healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so living this new modern world, I feel like I think the gender role is one, it's becoming more and more fluid. I think we are in a place where we can really define what it looks like that's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, two is part of the gender role and um, is really being able to tap into the masculine energy and the feminine energy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is kind of like the deeper work because like for the longest time I had to figure out what it means to be a male, and I ended up being like a passive kind of guy who was trying to be the nice guy, and I cringed thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that you know we do have some like roles to play in the society,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also part of our responsibility to acknowledge those roles and push the boundaries a little bit, just so
Mm-hmm.
that we can be free.
Yeah.
And so like I did this one thing, activity years ago, right? It was like a full quadrant. On the on the top level is like plus, which is positive,
Mm-hmm.
and the bottom was negative.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the left side was males, and the right side was female.
Mm-hmm.
And we started associating like different emotional patterns to like what's positive, what's negative, what's positive, negative.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's by when I talk about gender role, right, it's getting a little tricky because um, we block off this energy from other person because we like from the other side because we don't want to be called feminine if you're a man, or women. It's like, well, if I'm a masculine man, what I'll be judged. I won't be girly, right? Once again, going back to this idea of not being accepted by society, being judged by our family.
Mm-hmm.
But the one cool thing is that once you're positive and you go to negative, you have nowhere else to go. But if you allow yourself to tap into, as a Vietnamese-American male, the feminine energy, right, which is being more like softer in tone, recognizing like the compassion, the love, you tap into the feminine energy. And guess what happens? Because you have that spectrum of emotions to go through, you
Mm-hmm.
are now freely more present to your partner, to your community, to your work, to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's like my philosophy when it comes to gender role
Yeah.
and recognizing how that has prevented me in the past because I picked up this negative habit of one, I had such an anger problem because I picked it up from my dad,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of hoarding, a little bit of like not communicating with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to build really intimate relationships. I
Mm-hmm.
would never communicate those because I was so afraid of being like my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And so that
Oh.
had to, we have to break down that gender role. And I had to tap in. I'd be like, I am
Uh,
so scared I was talking to a friend a couple days ago. I am so scared to lose you as a friend because I would never ever want to lash at you. And I don't know how to navigate that. But being
mm-hmm.
able to say that in a vulnerable space,
Mm-hmm.
like I can, this is the most beautiful friendship ever. I love this.
Yeah. Sorry, you cut out for a
I saw a
few
reaction. It
seconds.
was like, it'd be like you've,
Yeah, no, like no, I did this
oh,
because I'm
yeah, I
like
think the Wi Fi.
I relate a lot. Like I just had a recent experience where I was holding back a lot of anger because I didn't want to turn to my grandpa. Like
Right.
yeah, like and
Like,
I'm a woman, right? But I too feel actually constrained by actually masculinity. Like I think maybe it's from my mom, but like my mom is like very driven and likes to put her foot down and say, okay, yeah, have your separate bank account, that kind of thing. Right, gotta be independent. So I too also feel an imbalance within me. But yeah, like you were saying, it's like it's so important to like integrate those two energies in our lives because they're like I think truthfully maybe all of us do have both within us that are waiting to be expressed. And yeah, and then there are times where it's like maybe I'm I've sunk back into my comfort zone for a while, and I'm just like rearing to go and express that masculinity and just like that ambition, chase after my dreams, which I think like a lot of women can feel held back because like fear of failure, or fear of displeasing other people. Like we're very we can be very like people centric people.
Yeah,
So.
no, and that was a really good example. Like things I would work with people like interns, clients, and so on. That was a good example right there. It's like
Mhm.
because we can't tap into the other energy because it's too manly, or oh, that's so girly. What the heck, right?
Mhm.
Um, we really are limiting our capacity to navigate.
Mhm. Right.
I love this. Like the more and more time spending doing leadership coaching,
Mhm.
it really comes back down to having the freedom toward what will help make more content for you.
Mhm.
Um, and it has nothing to do with lowering your standard, not achieving. It's all about meeting yourself where you're at and growing
Mhm.
into the next stage of life,
Mhm.
expanding yourself into something more.
Mhm.
Um, that was a fear. I was like, if I let go of this part and I tap into this softer side,
Mhm.
I will be a failure. I will no longer be an achiever. I'm like, wait, that's
Mhm.
because like as long as we have the ability to navigate and do what motivates us, like brings us that contentment, the emotional richness, we'll always strive to do better for ourselves and for those around us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's like that feminine energy can also be very restorative and helping you to fill up your gas tank for the next big leap in life. Um and yeah, like with the love you show and the people you support, that itself is also an achievement. So it's like, yeah, kind of rewiring the way we think about those things. And yeah, and on my end, also sometimes it's like um you know I can feel discomfort, right? In like, stretching myself further to be, let's say more feminine in a situation or more masculine in a situation where I'm not used to, right? So that could be like another barrier for some people too. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're looking to be integrated and whole human beings. And um, yeah, like
Yeah.
it, yeah, expressing both sides. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
and a thought just came to me. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. Go
Well, I
ahead.
want to bring this up because I realized something really interesting. I forgot to bring this up too. Like, you know how at
Uh-huh.
the beginning I was talking about like learning like the Asian American history part,
Yeah.
right? So it's easy to talk about like, oh, tap into feminine energy, masculine energy, but I'm gonna say like, as an Asian American male, the hardest part is tap into that feminine, more softer energy, because there's a history that we're like the United States has continuously emasculated Asian men over and over,
Mm.
and that creates a fear. And
Wait, the
us to be
United
able to tap into that
States,
feminine energy and
the
be
the
like, no,
United
you show
States,
myself.
oh, emasculates. Oh, right, yeah, like right, yeah. There's just like this big media thing
Yeah,
where misrepresented, and Asian men not wanting to identify with that misrepresentation. Is that what you're saying?
right.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's history too. Like when um, Filipinos and Chinese were brought over, right, to do like labor work in
Hmm.
like early like I think 1900s, I believe, right, or 1800s. I got to double check.
Hmm.
Um, they were not allowed to bring women over, so men
Hmm.
were only allowed to come over from other countries
Hmm.
to work. Now,
Hmm.
here's a funny thing, and this is one of the stories someone told me.
Uh-huh.
You have Asian men in the fields working on farms.
Uh-huh.
You know they are going to be building their body up. You're going to see them muscular,
Mm.
strong.
Hmm.
You're going to be like, dang, these guys are hot. And guess who gets jealous? The people who doesn't want to work there. And
Yeah.
they were dating white women.
Yeah.
Guess what? They'll do everything they can, like the mainstream narrative, to destroy that image that Asian men are more masculine
Mm.
because they were so afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean by it's like there's a history of emasculating Asian men.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know that history. If we don't know that history, we don't recognize that there's a lot of worth to who we are individually, or as a, like, I guess you could say, like, individually, as a group. And so that was a good example right there. It's like we have to recognize that history, recognize the system that try to emasculates us.
Yeah.
Because once we recognize that, have that awareness, then we can
Mm-hmm.
actually tap into the energy, and we can actually be more fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a really
I
good.
just had to throw it out there because that was like my biggest awakening moment.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone else on this podcast had also mentioned that I think a lot of Asians here are trying to prove themselves because of, but generally because of, not wanting to be looked down upon as a minority. Kind of in response to racism, right? So, um, yeah, it's something you didn't think about before, but someone brought it up. Um, so so yeah, onto a different topic, um what is
Sylvia, I have a
spirituality.
favor.
Oh
Can you
yeah,
pause for a second?
yeah, sure.
You were talking about spirituality, was it?
Yeah, spirituality. So was spirituality something you had with you from the very beginning, or was it something you sought out for yourself later in life?
Ooh, I am pretty sure my old church community is going to yell at me for this one. So I
Okay.
started as, like I said, I started as Catholic.
Uh-huh.
And so we were taught the whole entire thing, Jesus is that, Jesus is this, there's a God, but there's three gods in one,
Mm-hmm.
very confusing,
Mm-hmm.
something about the mother of God.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, they're going to really hate me for that. They're going to be like, that was so sacrilegious happening. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. All right. I have more reference to that. I just like to talk casual.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned early on, like I was an altar server, like an altar boy for the longest time. Like um, by the time I was done with high school, I knew how like wedding rituals were working, how to do baptism, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some people even thought I was like, "Are you gonna be a priest?" I'm like, "No, heck no."
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't develop my spiritual practice until college, when I realized that there was something more in the world that was just continuously calling out to me. Like there was something more that was like saying, like, Anthony, you're meant to do more than this. Anthony, why are you planning to slave away at a 9 to 5 job?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what life really is about? So
Mm-hmm.
there was always like a little voice that was calling to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a psychotic episode. Oh, sorry, that might have been insensitive. I don't think it was any kind of an issue, but it was definitely an internal calling
Mm-hmm.
that was saying that there was something more out there in the world, and my heart knew that it was there.
Mm-hmm.
So I discovered Ignatian Spirituality, and that's why I spend more time in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing about this prayer was that it had nothing to do with go to the Bible and read, find your answer there. Like it was more of like being connected to God and saying, what is the right thing for me that God has designed within me, in my own heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it had led me to many times where I have conversation where I go, what I really desire is to serve the Asian American community and doing leadership work, but is that the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then I had like had a conversation, right? Just like, and being present, like recognizing what was fear, what was injected upon me, and what was like my true, like what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so practicing like having those conversations and recognizing what will bring me most joy, most
Mm-hmm.
contentment, most freedom, and mostly how to love freely. Because I think a lot of my work is around love, really, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that has guided me, and it continues to guide me to something bigger and bigger each time. And each time that I reach a new milestone,
Mm-hmm.
I always look back and go, how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was like the spiritual life was just always going back and say, what will nurture my heart the most? What will nurture my soul?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ollie, I was trying to do coaching one time, and I was not connected spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up giving more advice and telling
Mm-hmm.
people what to do than actually be a coach.
Mm.
But when I started to step into the place of like, like the real spirit and like, being able to be guided from a place of like a deep soulful connection,
Mm-hmm.
um, I wasn't being, I didn't feel a need to push and project my desire and my wants and what I think people should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I allowed them to navigate their own freedom with their own freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the final like realization of like, oh my goodness, when I'm coming from a spiritual place, we can
Mm-hmm.
create that for each other and we can navigate effectively for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like us trying to convince each other that's the right thing to do because our insecurities are showing up.
Right. Yeah. 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 And it's taken me a while to like unlearn that as well. And I'm still on my way to unlearning that. Like because sometimes like in the coaching world there's like this idea that you need to like push people forward, right, a certain way, and I'm like but I also recognize the value of like letting people be themselves and um talk about what they want. And yeah, I'm curious about what 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 drew you to the Asian American community? Like, you know, what is it about serving Asian Americans that calls to you?
Um, well, I think you cover a little bit too. I want to hear your story one day,
Okay.
Lilia.
Mm-hmm.
But it ties to that because I was doing coaching or like learning how to be a coach, and people always say like, you got to push them to this point, right? You got to push them here, right? And I'm like, okay, that sounds good,
Mm-hmm.
but there was never a talk about embracing and like welcome them into the space, right? It's always like push, 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 push,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It makes me question. It's like if you're pushing so much, are you really pushing them into a state of fear and acting out of fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or are
Yeah.
you really coming from a place of like a genuine, like heartfelt,
Mm-hmm.
like desire?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
there was a missing piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After grad school, my friend and I were working on a podcast together. We were trying to
Mm-hmm.
launch it, and this is actually pretty recent, right? We're like just launching a little bit. Actually, that was like 2 years after grad school, or 3 years. It just felt like so short time. We're talking about doing a leadership podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and it was for tech people, people who are professional. And I said, we got to bring this up, this issue about diversity and equity and inclusion, right? We got to talk
Mm-hmm.
about like, the challenges and how we should create more voices for Asian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend at the time was just like so scared of that topic. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, why? And I spent more and more time. And I've done some like, I was like searching around, like saying, let me explore job interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another equity, diversity, inclusion work job. And I talked to finally one Asian person in the panel, right? And I asked him, I was like, all right, I'm going to tell you this. And I think this probably cost me this interview. I don't know. I think there's a really strong push for equity and the Black community and the Brown community. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the conversation, Asians gets thrown out of the picture. They're not included in the picture. And she went nuts. She was like, oh my goodness, finally someone said it. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, that's a good entry point.
Uh-huh.
Because I've done training for other groups too, right? And in the
Mm-hmm.
Asian community, it's like they feel like they're privileged, but they're not privileged. They're marginalized, but they're marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that confusion that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last
Yeah,
one
yeah.
was like, yeah. So the last one, I was like, I was trying to find an Asian American leadership coach, right? As a
Mm-hmm.
mentor, right? So I could learn from. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't find anything. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I realized the voice has been missing were Asian American voices who are willing to create a space for other Asian Americans to thrive in. And I realized because I was missing, maybe it's my time to help create that space. And that's how I got into this even more.
Right.
But also recognizing Asian Americans could do a lot better in the allyship and the solidarity building. So part of that voice is to come in and be like, let's do this. Let's make sure that our voice is heard, but make sure we do it in a way that doesn't like hurt other people. Because we know what it's like to be in that middle and be thrown around and be used as a weapon against each other. Let's step away from that and be smart about it so we can actually build better allyship.
Right. Yeah, like Because I noticed like as I was moving to the space, there were some things I would say that would actually be too much generalizing. For it would land with people the wrong way. The people are like, no, that's not me, right? That's not the problem I'm dealing with, right? Because there's like
Right.
so many like there's so much diversity in the Asian American community. And between individuals. So it's like some people are like, well, for instance, my parents aren't like that, right? My parents are not tiger parents, and then there are people with tiger parents, and then there are people who face other issues. Um, but yeah, like for you, what have you found out about like how we could create more of allyship in our community?
So, like what we were saying before, right? It's recognizing where we fall into this pit. I
Mm-hmm.
saw it on Instagram. I thought that was really good. I wish I had better memory to like like source these people, cite
Mm-hmm.
these people. But there was like the Asian triangulation theory,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, I loved it. I gotta find it.
Okay.
But the idea is that white folks are the
Mm-hmm.
dominant culture,
Mm-hmm.
black folks are below us, brown folks are below us, Asians are in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what it is that we're
Oh,
being
okay.
used by other groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whites are using us against black and brown folks, saying, well, they're the Asian model minority, right?
Mm-hmm.
They made it happen.
Mm.
But when like the pandemic hit,
Mm-hmm.
but by the way, Asian people are the one who released the virus. Whoa, where is this coming from?
Mm.
Because it's like we're always used as a tool
Mm.
to push a narrative, right?
Mm.
And I'm like, that's got to stop. I think the first part is recognizing how to speak up for ourselves and be able to say, that's wrong, that's racist.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go back to school to develop your articulation and your critical thinking skills because all that was just BS.
Mm-hmm.
Um, us being able to say that, start creating this voice for ourselves that's strong,
Mm-hmm.
but also coming from a place of like, I'm here to show up to support building a greater equitable community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will lead us into the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And what that looks like is like would be, for example, um, I've had people who've always said, this is the we need to make sure we have solidarity. We gotta have some like inclusiveness, and they'll say, yeah, we need more black and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Asians? It's like, what about the Asians? But the other side of that, right? I had a conversation yesterday, right, where people were like, we need more Vietnamese people working with the black community. I'm like, okay, cool, sounds good, but you forgot the brown community. You need to include that Latinx community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to always call in is like you left the group out right there and make sure you have that voice and advocate for other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very good first step to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when it comes to working with the other minority communities, what I guess like um, it are we like are all three groups kind of like supporting each other to fight against racism in general, like racism towards minorities in general, or are there other ways of support in inter support that maybe I haven't heard of?
Um, I would say there are a lot more groups who are working together to build solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like on like the legislation level, the state government level, federal
Mm-hmm.
level, where they're releasing statements condemning
Mm-hmm.
violence against like any like ethnic groups,
Mm-hmm.
people of color.
Right. Mm-hmm.
On the ground, is each individual organization, each individual community needs to do some work themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's also hilarious. There's like a car alarm in the background going blaring. So I apologize for that.
No worries.
Uh, but the work that needs to be done on the ground also has to have an open door to let other people to show up and be
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Part of that conversation also is the community members. You got to own your people too. In
Mm-hmm.
terms that if they say something racist, you have to be able to say that's not right,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
But if there's guests, you also have the courage to call in the guest and be like, "Hey, what you did was also racist."
Yeah.
So
Right.
everyone's so focused on doing the right thing
Mm-hmm.
that we forget to do what's the like working from the heart, which is like
Mm-hmm.
saying, hey, there's some mistakes we made. Let's make sure we fix this, or let's
Mm-hmm.
make sure we work together to see how we avoid this in the future.
Right.
So that's what I've seen that's going on right now. It's actually
Mm-hmm.
improving a lot. Um,
That's great to hear.
but every once in a while, yeah, but once in a while you hear like more of like the ignorant folks who are just like spewing a lot more hatred because
Oh.
they need to learn. They just need someone to help guide them.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and at one what is it? At a coaching group I attend, actually someone was talking about, how to respond when, someone is treating you unfairly at work because of your race. And he was saying, oh, like, work together with them, like be the example you want to see. Don't like necessarily like fight them, which I think is actually quite counterintuitive, right? And I'm always like curious as to like what are the different ways of like handling situation, because what some of the things you said, right? Like right, I think there was the air of like, standing firm and being straight with people, which I think is also important too. So it's like, hey, uh what I guess what's a good balance at the end of the day.
It's funny because when you said that, my first thought gravitated to show them what you want to be, but
Hmm.
it speaks a lot to, okay, it's you're representing yourself, which is good, right? You're trying
Hmm.
to tell people how you should treat them. But sometimes systemically, you just have to have a system to help support you too.
Hmm. Right.
So let's say, for example, if they say something like just like offensive, right? That might have like racial tone, like a racially charged tone to it, right?
Hmm.
It's if someone goes up to um, like if they went up to me, right? And I'm using an
Hmm.
example, like, and they go like, Anthony, man, that was such a great big job you did. But you
Hmm.
know how like Asian men, with small things, right? Ha ha ha
Hmm.
ha.
Hmm.
And I would be like, I'm gonna be a proper and like present myself a certain way, and my response would be like, no, I'm just gonna be like, that was racist. Just like
Right.
that was a stereotype and that was racist. Like there is no such thing
Yeah.
of be the proper way. But
Right. Hmm.
it then goes on to the other level too, right? It's like,
Hmm.
does this person have like a history, a record? Does this person is leading and making bad decision based on like their own like ignorance and bigotry? And
Hmm.
so sometimes like and one of the things I try to teach like the people I work with, the clients,
Hmm.
you need to have a systems awareness, a systems thinking approach, because you need
Hmm.
to also recognize, yes, one part is you, but the other
Hmm.
part is you have to recognize, are you embedded in a racist system,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
I'm gonna get in trouble for this one. Hopefully you don't like lose any future sponsors, but Google for the longest time was promoting like this, like there's this great place to be at, right?
Hmm.
Like it says be googly, right? And googly was the term for like being good, right? Don't be evil, be googly. They took out the don't be evil part.
Hmm.
Then after a while, right, when like they start releasing a statement on like women's pay,
Hmm.
they were like they retaliate against their own staff for releasing that information, and they
Oh, wow.
demoted people. They removed them from their team.
Oh.
Um, the black the black scientists at Google, right, were retaliated against. They were fired, and they
Hmm.
got back to the people, to the press,
Hmm.
right? That's a good example of like no matter how much PR you try to push,
Hmm.
systemically, if you have people who are not aware of like being inclusive,
Hmm.
then no matter how much you try to be somebody else or try to be the proper version,
Hmm.
right? One, try to be somebody else, the proper version, you then fall
Hmm.
into the imposter syndrome, which
Hmm.
leads you to this whole bunch of feeling of self-doubt. But the
Hmm.
other part is that you don't really address the change, and you're actually falling into like just being more submissive later on.
Hmm.
And that's something that a lot of us Asians got to recognize. It's like,
Hmm.
yes, we can show up a certain way, but we have to also be smart and look at it systemically and go, how is the systems at work for me, and how is it against me, and how else is showing it for other people?
Hmm. Right. Yeah, it's like, well, I guess when you have that bigger perspective, also, it's like there's less of a tendency to take these things personally and actually pinpoint what can be changed um, at the moment. And yeah, like as we're speaking about this topic, I kind of realized, because I myself haven't really experienced like direct racism before. I'm uh, like I'd be curious to hear like you know just to what extent racism can impact somebody, and like I guess like what can take them from a point of like very low to a point where like they're standing up for themselves, and still navigating the world even though a lot of things seem to be against them.
Um, so let me sure I hear this right. So you're asking what can someone do to
Yeah, to I guess overcome the effects of racism, especially like on an internal level. Because I guess it,
internal like
yeah,
personality
yeah,
or inter-
it's like that triggered that thought of like not being good enough because maybe people don't think Asians are good enough, or
yeah, this takes a lot of emotional work slash internal reflection.
mm-hmm,
But for the other people who are scared of it, right, then I would be like, okay, it takes some scientific work.
mm-hmm,
You need to gather some metrics and some evaluation, some
mm-hmm,
scientific work right there, right? For those
mm-hmm,
who are like more like data driven,
mm-hmm,
look at the system. What are the points that have caused a emotional reaction? Figure out what the
mm-hmm,
emotional reaction is and
mm-hmm,
what the meaning you associate with that.
mm-hmm,
Do enough of that, you start seeing a trend.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so, for example, there's a job promotion that comes out.
mm-hmm,
Oh, sweet.
mm-hmm,
I'm going to apply for it, but I don't know if I'm good enough. Well, why? What makes you think you're not good enough?
mm-hmm,
I haven't. I've all my life. I've always struggled trying to barely meet the standard, and
mm-hmm,
I always feel like I'm barely meeting the standard, or I
mm-hmm,
always feel like I'm not called upon to ask take on hard projects.
mm-hmm,
I'm like, okay, and this is
mm-hmm,
where the internal reflection, because I've done this with other folks.
mm-hmm,
When you're not called on,
mm-hmm,
have you spoken up? Oh,
mm-hmm,
yes, I have. Okay, have what other perception are you feeling when they don't call on you, right?
mm-hmm,
Is it because you're an Asian woman,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
There's data that says Asian women aren't called on to leadership roles
mm-hmm,
because if you look at the dynamic, Asian women don't talk like a white man. Does
mm-hmm,
do not talk like a white man,
mm-hmm,
right? There have been studies where um, when they're looking for successors for like CEOs, they look for people who communicates like that CEO they're replacing.
oh,
So if and that's what I mean right there. It's like looking at internal
mm-hmm,
reflection and go,
yeah,
that had nothing to do with you and your worth. That had everything to do with that. It just didn't match their style of what they think is leadership.
mm-hmm,
And so once you start recognizing that how the system puts you in that spot,
mm-hmm,
you can then start countering some of it. So one of
mm-hmm,
my clients I've had, same
mm-hmm,
exact situation. We
mm-hmm,
were able to help her figure out to like she embraced her feminine charm, but she also
mm-hmm,
embraced a little bit of that masculine energy.
mm-hmm,
She became a director. She
mm-hmm,
overtook somebody,
mm-hmm.
a tech bro,
Wow.
right? Because the tech role was working from insecurity and always pushing people down. She built the politics. She built the net relationship with people, and she
Mm-hmm,
also owned her identity. And so when she stepped up and she needed to step up, she's not being asked to step up all the time. She usually
mm-hmm,
steps up when it's most critical moment.
mm-hmm,
She got the promotion and she
mm-hmm,
beat the guy out
mm-hmm,
because that was an example right there. Where it was like she recognized she took a step time to work on herself, understand what was those points that are affecting her that
mm-hmm,
make her feel like an imposter. We looked at
mm-hmm,
that and it's like that system was playing into your imposter syndrome because it was telling you were not good enough because you were not a white man.
mm-hmm,
Once we figured that out, we countered all that, and she was able to
mm-hmm.
get through that.
Wow.
Um, yeah, cool thing about that, right? She also
Yeah.
recognized she didn't belong in that company afterwards,
Mm-hmm,
and she left the company afterwards too. And so
mm-hmm,
once again, it always goes back to her own personal needs, desire, and freedom, and courage to pursue all those.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's what you shared just got me present to like how a lot of this is like invisible to many people, right? A lot of the systemic stuff is invisible until we actually dig in and we try start tracing things back to their root cause. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, also I guess being in this space for like Asian Americans, like I feel, sometimes the topics of like racism or family pressure can, you know, feel like feel very heavy to
Oh
be
yeah.
really honest, right? And there's times where I feel like, oh my goodness, like I feel like huge imposter syndrome in my work because I'm like, well, the severity of the issue could be this much or it could be like that much for a person, right? And it's like, if you haven't been through like that much severity, right? Like, how do you help people navigate that? Yeah, so
Wait,
uh
and are you talking about this as your experience as a coach, or
like, yeah, my experience as a coach, like sometimes I feel like there's issues being brought up and I'm like, I don't know, like I actually don't know how to navigate this. I haven't read the recipe book for exactly, like,
right? Well, one of the best thing I've learned is that it's such a human thing too, right? But even more, like maybe because I grew up Asian, right? It's an
Mhm.
Asian thing to know the answer, so you can give the answer to somebody else,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, I don't know about you, but it's like middle school. Like someone's asking me for the answer to cheat in their own life tests. It's like, no, it doesn't work because I could set different scores. I mean, just
Yeah.
set different tests than you
Hmm.
do, right? And so if we're gonna use that, like we're gonna like play into the model minority myth. Like, fine, all right, fine. You're gonna try to cheat off of me because I'm the model minority. But guess what? My answers don't fit your answers. So stop using that against me. Live your own life. Seriously. So there's that. But
Okay.
but the not it's funny. It's like I was talking about, we were talking about Anne earlier, right? But in this case also as a coach in the work I've done, the exact same thing. It's always coming up and saying, well, gives me the right to coach somebody? What gives me the right to be a guide in someone's life?
Hmm.
And our perception, and a lot of coaches I think struggle with this, is I have to have the answer to be a good coach.
Hmm.
In reality, an amazing coach is knowing, understanding how human behavior works, the
Hmm.
patterns,
Hmm.
but then also creating the space to ask those deep questions so that they can find the answer.
Hmm.
Because a
Right.
coach will never know what the world's like. A coach will never fully understand what the emotions are like, but a coach can definitely create the space
Hmm.
so that you could tap into their deepest, truest self and say,
Right.
what is the answer that you want to proceed, the step you want to
Hmm.
proceed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, just when you said that, I realized that the gap for me personally is that, having faith, right? Because this is like, when I look at sometimes the scale of what someone has in front of them, the challenges they have to deal with, right? I can feel intimidated. I would be like, yeah, how do you get from like, I mean, like, is it possible to get from point A to point Z? And probably other people have walked through it, right? But how to make it possible for this person, right? Like how to help this person see that it is possible, and that is something that comes up for me.
Oh yeah, it's and this is why I love doing being a coach, because there's work that needs to be done on our end where
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that was totally me trying to tell you what to do, because when I'm working with you, you brought up
Mhm.
some insecurity within me and I'm trying to mask it.
Mhm.
So by even having that awareness, you'd be like, you know what? You just trigger something inside of me. And I
Mhm.
realize I'm going through the same challenge. Is this
Mhm.
what the challenge looks like? What would you do differently? And you throw it back the
Mhm.
work to them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right.
Right. And it's then you realize it's like, you're not trying to live their life. You're trying to
Mhm.
help them be a coach.
Mhm.
But I'm sorry, you're trying to help them by being a coach. There you go.
Yes, yes. Yeah. It's like how could you look at the situation differently, or what might be possible from from this, right? What might be possible from this? What strengths do you have inside of you? What are the resources around you you can tap into? What do you need right now, right? And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
okay, all right.
and I love this because this is what I'm thinking. But until you find your voice and your compass point to navigate that,
Mm-hmm.
and like so in this case, acknowledging or fully embracing our Asian American identity, whether it's the history, our personal history, or family history,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to navigate and have access to everything because you purposely
Mm-hmm.
cut yourself off. But once you acknowledge every part of it,
Mm-hmm.
you have now many paths and resources that's available to you internally, emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, like yeah, that's even something I'm dealing with on my own journey, right? Is to feel that I am a part of this whole, right? Like the both the Asian American community and the communities outside our community, right? And the world, the rest of the world, and that these resources are actually available to me, and that I do deserve you I mean, I do deserve what I ask for and receive, right? Instead of feeling
Oh yes,
undeserving, right? Instead of feeling
yes,
undeserving or cut off or, um, right? Like, oh, because I'm more privileged than other people, I can't have this, right? Or maybe give it to someone else, right? That kind of thing. But also, yeah, other divisions, right? Like hierarchy, divisions of hierarchy.
oh
That
yeah,
one gets to me a lot too. It's like, feeling fear when, there's not a chance to connect with someone who is, very like, more accomplished, more successful, has more money, XYZ, right? Or even like, connecting with parents, connecting with the older generation, right? And, because that generation gap, that values gap, that,
yeah.
um
So Lilia, I'm
yeah.
going to ask
Hmm.
this just because I like to do this every once in a while on other people's podcasts.
Yeah.
So everything we talked about, right? And it
Hmm.
sounds like there's a lot of work you're doing. I'm loving this.
Yeah.
How can you find more freedom in your work to navigate?
Yeah, okay. That is a very good question. How can I find more freedom? Um yeah, I think you know, continuing to come back to, okay, what can I offer, right? Well, what do I have within me that can add value to someone else's life? And taking the leap in offering that to others. And if I'm not sure yet, right, I have a lot of friends who are Asian coaches, and I can ask them, hey, what do you think about, this kind of service or that kind of value, right? And instead of like, blocking it all off, right? And being like, oh, maybe some other coach can do it better, I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm. I love
Yeah.
it. So you're very much tapping into the collective wisdom of your community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think there is a
And
lot of wisdom.
that's a beautiful answer to how to navigate. You don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's so true. Like even getting a bunch of people in a room and be like, "Hey, what do you think the Asian community needs right now? That's someone isn't working on right now."
Oh, yeah, I need to do that soon. Yeah, well, it's because I'm doing like these anti-Asian awareness campaign, like a side, not a side project, but definitely get that onto the radar. And
Hmm.
so I need to do that soon. So you just remind me like other works I got to do after this.
Okay. Anti-Asian awareness campaign? Oh,
Yeah. So
like
yeah, go ahead.
you mean raising awareness about uh issues against Asians, like people having issues
Yeah,
against Asians? Yeah.
yeah. So you heard about the attacks, right, on the elderly?
On the
Have you? The elderlies, the older folks in the
I
Asian
haven't heard
community.
of them. Oh, the older. Oh, what's been going on?
So so they're gonna. So this is why I also like when I do my work, it's so important to talk about Asian American history.
Hmm.
So there's been a string of violence against the Asian community, right? Especially elderlies, right? They're
Hmm.
being robbed in broad daylight. Some been pushed to the point of their head bashing open and dying, like literally dying, like
Oh,
straight up,
wow.
not like metaphorically like, oh, they died and like they're just having a rough day. Like they are killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's been going on. It's been going on for a while. And so I've been helping build more awareness, right? And so which is good because on a state level, city level, people have released and condemned the violence now, which is
Mm-hmm.
good. And then the next step, right, is me organizing like or Asian American orgs around here, see
Mm-hmm.
what do we have, what our needs are, and how to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's yeah, that's pretty serious, but yeah, no, you're doing some good work there, much needed,
Thank you.
really.
Yes. And I also need more vacations because of this.
After this is over, take a nice long vacation after COVID.
We will
Um,
see. We will see. But yeah, it's the work I do. It's like I realize the theme of like not having a voice,
mhm,
it's runs rampant, not just within ourselves, but like as a system level, community
right.
level, greater
Yeah.
society. Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes from so many different sources.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like the Asian culture itself and the American culture. So, but yeah, no, you're doing some, really solid work, and you've gotten yourself involved in, you know, um yeah, like I feel like you're at the very you're at the front lines of it, and I have much respect for that. Lots of courage, the amount of courage and faith it must have taken for you to get to where you are right now, and I can only hope that I'll I'll follow. I can make it,
Well,
what I meant to do.
do my thing is when I hear that is one, it had nothing to do with courage, but more of just how much I love the community and it's the right thing
Mm,
to do
right,
where I'm
right.
at.
Yeah,
So like if I was like in like say back in San Diego for grad school, for example, right,
yeah.
I would probably figure out different ways of helping. Whereas now I'm back in San Jose, California, I'm
Mm-hmm,
doing different things. And then the
mm-hmm,
last thing is, yeah, don't follow my footstep.
mm,
Walk in your own step path. Because
mm.
that's what the world needs is you to have your own voice to move forward, right? And that's what it is.
That's
That's
true.
what we all and that's my purpose in life is tell people to find that for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, you know, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think I might be more on, like, I guess the career side, like empowering people to creatives especially to do what they love. Um
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I love it.
And then
Mhm.
like bridging those gaps with family.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love it. The work you're doing, like getting our voice out there through the podcast. Um, I love every bit of that. So that's why I was like, oh, I get to be part of this. So I'm very
Yeah.
happy. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of the podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here, and definitely learned a lot today. Thank you for sharing. You're very well spoken. It's clear you've thought a lot about these things. And I hope I didn't throw you too many curveballs at you, but I really was curious.
No, 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 no. I just realized when I marked all the topics I could talk about, I was like, oh, maybe I should have simplified it so it
And maybe you
was
should have
easier
what?
for you.
Huh?
Simplified like one or two items. So that way like you wouldn't be like so like pressured to ask so many questions.
Oh no, I didn't feel pressured. I was just
Okay, good,
genuinely
good.
curious. But also, I can get pretty philosophical and intense. So like
Oh,
yeah.
I know that feeling. Oh,
Some
I've been there. I've been that person.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I'm like walking outside and my mind is like eating itself because it's like, like digging really, really deep. um,
Yeah,
but yeah.
sweet. I don't know. Are there other questions for me? And how do we end this? Like in a good note, things like that.
Oh, at this moment, I don't have other questions. But if you ever want to record another episode, or book another chat with me, I'd be happy to share my story. Um, and yeah, but otherwise, I think this is great. You know, Always great learning from a new perspective. Do you have any, like, I guess, closing words for the audience?
Um, yeah, like, oh man, I'm trying to find a way to wrap up everything we talked about. Mm. I think probably the last thing that stood with me was like it wasn't too much about doing having courage,
Mm,
right? Courage is really good to have, right? But like I think the perception of courage is kind of like overblown. I think
mm,
it's always going back to doing what's the right thing for you and for your community.
mm,
And
right.
of course that means like having the heart, having vulnerable to that.
Mm,
Because for me, that's I've always been led by my heart in that case. And that
mm,
just made sense.
right.
So I wish everyone to be able to follow that.
Yeah. Well, it does take a lot of pressure off, having to like muster and for that courage and fight all the time, Just
It's
more natural.
exhausting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, sometimes we just need a place to rest so that we can have time to collect our thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. They say
Um,
like
but yeah,
yeah, they say it's like was it some Zen master said that hey, you can work uh like what is it? 16 hours a day and you'd make around the same progress as the person who works 8 hours a day. He said that to a student, right? Because the student was like, well, what if I train like all day, every day for like, 20 years, 70 years, whatever it is, right? And that's his answer. He's like, you're going to move forward at the same pace either way. I'm like,
oh yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the final words. Be kind in our work
Be,
moving forward.
being kind to ourselves. Yeah. 100%.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Anthony. And yeah, hope to see you around in the community. Feel free to reach out and yeah,
Yeah. It was my pleasure. It was a wonderful time spending with you on this. And
same here.
best wishes to you of the amazing work you're doing. And
Hmm.
hello, everybody. And
Okay.
I don't know if this is going to be on the website or not. Just throw out my contacts out there. Just
Yeah,
let the
sure.
people reach out if they have any questions.
Yeah, yeah. Feel free to like message me with them later on and I'll put it on the video description.
Awesome. All
Cool
right. Take
stuff.
care.
Yeah, take care. Have a great rest of your week, Anthony.
You too. Bye.
Okay, take care.